where is yoga from? Vedas, continuing our consideration of this sheet. So we've mentioned the Shat-darshanas, the 6 darshanas. These are known as Astika schools because they accept the authority of the Veda. The Nastika schools are Indian schools of philosophy that do not accept the authority of the Veda. So one well-known example of a Nastika school is the Buddhist school, for example. It does have a lot in common with many aspects of Vedic methods or Astika schools of knowledge or systems of philosophy, but it doesn't accept the authority of the Veda. Now, continuing with this sheet, so we've mentioned that the Indic culture, even if it is Nastika, even if it doesn't accept the authority of the Veda, it is still related to this source. It's still grown up in relation to this. So Buddhism, for example, it does not accept the authority of the Veda, but it has a lot in common with it. Gautama the Buddha grew up within that culture. And so his teachings, while he doesn't place emphasis on the Vedic tradition, it is undeniably linked to it, and many teachings have a lot in common with teachings of yoga or Vedanta, for example. Now, lower down this sheet, we can also see the Vedāṅga-s. These are the limbs or the ancillary supportive members of the Vedic literature. And these are really, like you can see, Shiksha and Chandas and Vyakarana and Nirukta. Now, Vyakarana is grammar, so obviously that's got so much broader application, but particularly what these first 4 are all about, and Kalpa also, and Jyotish, I mean, they're all really about how you can interpret the Vedic texts properly, so they're of use for you. So there's the idea that the Veda, as well as being a repository of knowledge, they are repositories of configured sound. And when we voice the hymns of the Veda in certain ways, they can facilitate or allow or invite or bring up certain states of awareness. They can have a very cleansing, harmonizing effect on our energy and the energy of the space around us. And this is why phonetics and meter and grammar and linguistics and kalpa, how you perform the hymns, and Jyotish, when you perform the hymns, why that's all so key to the Vedic system. So Jyotish also includes astronomy, astrology, and time. So it gives us a lot of guidance about why we do certain things at certain times. So for example, in yoga practice, it's recommended that certain types of practice are done at the junction times of the day. Yoga is all about joining and bringing into balance and harmony mutually complementary but sometimes seemingly opposed forces. So for example, at the dawn and the sunset, this is a natural junction point. There is a natural balancing. Maybe you've noticed, especially if you're in a place where the length of the night and day is relatively even, like it is in much of India and other subtropical places. But right now in the UK at this time of year, I'm recording this it's April, yeah? So already, I mean, here already in the north of England, the sunset is much longer than it is in the tropics. Even in April, it goes on. But at that sunset time, maybe you've noticed there is a certain calm that comes. It invites a meditative state of awareness. So the idea that at certain times of the day, this is when it's particularly auspicious and propitious to do certain types of practice. And this is, again, it's not like, sometimes people can think that this is a bit dogmatic, but there's the thing about the Indian tradition is that nothing is accidental or incidental. One of the great tragedies of the situation in India these days, and it's not me that calls it a tragedy, this is what my Indian teachers say, is that the years of the centuries of foreign domination and invasion have dimmed the light of much of the majesty of the Indic tradition. But there are still people who know why certain practices are done in certain ways. The tragedy is that a lot of people don't know why some things are done, and they're doing it in a dogmatic way. And you know how it is. Sometimes, say for example, if you don't understand why, it can get tweaked and it can come slightly distorted. But for example, some of my South Indian teachers, they follow particular codes related to food. But they make sense. There are good reasons why they don't eat certain things. For them, it's been proven that over many, many generations that actually that helps those people who perform those types of role in society. It's really done them a great service. Similarly, the best times to do certain things, the Indian tradition, the Vedāṅga-s, will tell you about that. But it's not just some artificial construct. For example, you may have noticed in your life that sometimes you feel much more in the mood for certain types of activity than at other times. Now, we might think this is random, but there's the idea, you know, we are, like we said in a previous video, where a lot of us is water. Just like the ocean on this watery planet, we wax and wane, like with the moon. All these celestial bodies, we are part of this bigger system, and all those movements, they do affect us. So that the rishis, the research scientists of the Indian tradition, with their collective effort that went on for hundreds and hundreds of generations, they came to recognize, the ancients did this in many ancient cultures, they tracked the stars, they were much more connected with nature, and they were able to recognize, yes, it is better to plant the food at certain times of the lunar cycle, to plant the seeds at certain times of the lunar cycle. It does tend to bring, for example, if you want to conceive a child, it does make sense to make the attempt to do that at these times in the woman's cycle. For example, it's not just based on some superstition or some dogma. The Veda is a truth, or a recognition, something that was revealed, something that was come to, an insight that was gained by careful, patient, open observation. So the idea that the Vedāṅga-s, they help us, or they help a person who's interested in doing so, relate to the truths that are encoded within the hymns of the Veda in a way that makes good sense for us, that helps us actualize the aims of the Veda. One, to live happily, harmoniously, in a balanced, nourishing, respectful way in the world, and two, to become freer and freer, to move towards realization of our ultimate self. So I mentioned briefly the sections of the Vedic literature, the hymns, and then the commentaries on the hymns, and then the commentaries that go a bit more into the rituals, how you can work with the hymns and the rituals, and then the Upanishads, which gives us much more of, let's say, spiritual literature and practical philosophy. And the Upanishads are very important source texts for yoga and for Vedanta. And we'll speak a little bit more about the Upanishads in a separate video. I'd like to also just mention here the Upaveda-s. So I imagine you've heard of Ayurveda. Ayuhu means lifespan. So Ayurveda is the Indian art and science of a long and healthy life, the Indian system of health. And it's all based around balance. There's the idea that if you can come into balance and rhythm and harmony, then you will set yourself up to have a long, healthy life in which you can make the most of the amazing gift of life. So yoga and Ayurveda, they're based on they're based on the same principles, because they're both part of this Vedic system. And in the Vedic system, the idea is to honor life, to live well. And the idea is that if we live well and happily, if we create harmony in our life, if we create a sense of enoughness, then it's a natural phenomenon that as a human being we start to inquire into the deeper aspects of life. And this is the wonderful thing that happened in the ancient Indian system. On the Indian subcontinent, thousands of years ago, some parts of the subcontinent, people were living in peace. There was abundant food. people settled, and in that relatively stable state, the natural inquiring nature of the human being was able to blossom forth, and people could start to ask those questions, those perennial human questions. Oh, what's it all about? Who am I, really? Why am I here? Why can I feel all these different things in these different ways, and why do I feel so different day to day, and what creates the day and the night, and all these types of questions. And the stability of that society allowed them this amazing culture based on inquiry, based on what we might call an authentic scientific method of honest inquiry, to begin, and then it allowed the arts to start to flourish and develop. So you notice also in the Upaveda-s we have systems of archery and the martial arts, Dhanurveda. The Dhanu, or the bow, was the most important weapon in the culture of those times, thousands of years ago. But we also have a whole system of architecture, and this is related to this is what's known as Vastu-Shāstra, which is basically the Indian equivalent of Feng Shui. So it's how you organize space. So for example, in the Vastu system, I'm very fortunate that the house that I rent in India, the owner lives downstairs, and he's a civil engineer, and when he built the home for his family, he wanted to build it as much in accord with the Vastu principles that are related and derived from the Veda, that are derived more specifically from Starped Veda, the section dealing with architecture. But in Vastu Shastra, the Indian Feng Shui, how you work with space, he built his house as much in accord with the principles of Vastu as he could. And the house that I stay in India has this wonderful energy flow. It's a very clean, clear space. Well, I keep it clean, but it's easy to keep clean. There is great energy flow. And the orientation of the house. So they live in a town, but as far as there is a street, there's a path, like a little street byway by the side of the house. So there is, again, energy can flow by the side of it. And for example, the kitchen is in the southeast, and the toilets and bathrooms are in the southwest. So there's the idea that the elements, the way you put them in the house, facilitates this flow of energy and this healthful space, if that makes sense. It does make sense to me now because I've lived there, and it's like, wow, yeah, man, it really does make a difference. So architecture, and so how we relate to shape and form and space, and how we can build space or curate or tend space, that it supports Ayurveda, that it supports harmony, health, wellness, balance. So we set ourselves up to be able to honor this gift of life and make the most of it. And then Gandharva Veda, the science of music and sacred dance. Now, I'm going to talk about this more when we speak about Hatha Yoga, but there are some people who very mistakenly, very blinkeredly, very arrogantly, and disgustingly, I would also say, in my opinion, they propagate these, to my mind, utterly ridiculous ideas that a lot of the things that people do with their bodies and call yoga are Western inventions from the late 19th century onwards, as if nobody in India ever did any physical exercise before the British invaded. They had warriors. There was a whole class of society who were warriors, and there was a very developed system of music and dance. So dance and martial arts were part of the Indian tradition thousands of years ago. So technologies that help harness the systems of the body so it can perform more skillfully, more easefully, more healthily, in a more robust way, they were definitely part of the ancient Indian system. They were definitely part of this system which supports yoga, balance, cohesion, wellness through the whole being, thousands of years ago. We'll speak more about that in another video. But hopefully that gives us a little bit of an overview of what people are talking about when they talk about the Vedic system. So it's not so much that they've read the hymns of the Veda, or they recite the hymns of the Veda, or they do Vedic ritual. It's like those hymns, they are, we might call, let's say, the reflection or the representation of the heart or soul or some of the core values of this highly developed culture that was existing in the lands we now call India thousands of years ago. And the literature around that, all of these other systems and methodologies have grown out from that source. Now, as well as the Vedāṅga-s and then the Upaveda-s, we then have what we call Shastras. And Shastras are bodies of knowledge that have been set down and developed in a way that they're very robust. So Yoga Shastra, the Yoga Sutra, is the text that made yoga into a Shastra. Shastra means it's been codified, it's been set down, it's having been thoroughly tested over many, many generations. When something becomes a Shastra, it's like you've got a codified body of knowledge that is reliable, has been thoroughly tested. So in Shilpa Shastra is the Shastra, the art and science of sculpture, which is related to, for example, Sthapyat Veda. The Upaveda, which is all about architecture and how it relates to space and form. So Natya Shastra is the Shastra of performing arts. So this is closely related to Gandharva Veda. The Upaveda to do with music and sacred dance. But Natya Shastra codifies, for example, what are called the Karanas, which are the instrumental positions of Shiva Nataraja. Shiva as the great dancer. Now Shiva is also known as Yogishwara, the lord of all yogis. So in the Natya Shastra, we find a lot of encoded information about Hatha Yoga, about working with the body in order to facilitate particular states or qualities of awareness. All this is to say that when something is Vedic, it doesn't necessarily mean that you find it in one of those 4 collections of writings in the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Atharva Veda, or the Sama Veda. It means it's related to the culture that has grown out of that source. And if it's called Vedic, it has a direct relationship to the Veda, and it doesn't dispute that the Vedas are revealed teachings and repositories of truth, which, if approached correctly with proper understanding and reverence, can shine light on reality in such a way that we can see it more truly, and it can help us do a better job of living happily, harmoniously, in a balanced way and actualizing ourselves. Indic knowledge or philosophy, we could say, is slightly broader, even though it may draw on many of the core values, ideas, principles that inhere in the Vedic system. It doesn't say that the Vedas are an ultimate authority. And so Buddhism, for example, could be considered to be part of the Indic tradition, but it stands slightly outside the Vedic tradition, if that makes sense. Some of the other tantric schools, similarly, they have a lot in common with many Vedic ideas, but they may sometimes be at loggerheads or even in quite clear contradistinction to some Vedic ideas. One other thing to mention about that is that over the millennia, over the centuries, the Vedic system became the mainstream for a significant period of Indian history. And so the association of Vedic systems of knowledge and sometimes allied or related belief systems came to be associated with political power. And so sometimes, for example, tantric schools, they were the schools that maybe stood outside the mainstream. They were not connected to the organization of society in the same way that Vedic ideas were. Now, that's a lot of information, but I'm hoping that that's going to give a little bit of context about Veda, but that's not the end, there's more to come.